Welcome. This is a deep dive special featuring Hudson Institute. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and joining me from Hudson's headquarters in Washington, D.C. is Mr. Ezra Cohen, former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, currently a senior fellow at Hudson Institute. It's great to have you, Ezra.
Good to be with you again, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Well, we talked about this briefly before the show, of course, but the situation in Syria is still evolving. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham conquered Damascus with focus on Hayat Tahrir al-Sham since Al-Julani practically asked all the other militias to leave the capital after they captured it, despite him not being the first one to enter the place. But we'll touch on the semantics very soon. What I would like to raise is, and it's quite astonishing, but there are two people from all the people I spoke with about this topic that actually saw something coming and saw what we saw in front of our eyes coming. The first one is Dr. Mike Duran, the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at Hudson Institute, who emphasized time and again, look at what Turkey is doing. This is something they are preparing for something. That comment was made a couple of times on air also, but also behind the scenes as the ceasefire talks were underway. And the second person is no other than you. While you were here in Jerusalem and we sat together here in my office, we had the opportunity to talk about different challenges and different analysis on a regional scale, on a global scale. And you said dead on, the Assad regime is going to fall in the next couple of weeks, something I scrabbled down afterwards. And to you, it was obvious, but apparently it was not obvious to the intelligence community, not here in Israel, nor was it in the United States or other Western intelligence agencies. What should we take out of that?
Well, first of all, Jonathan, to me, I think all of the ingredients were there. And that's really what, led me to that conclusion. I should also say that Mike Duran and I did not actually speak, so it's not circular reporting. That's two independent data points. Look, there were a few things that I saw happening that led me to that conclusion. One, Russia was no longer in a position, if contested, to prop up the Assad regime. Same thing for Iran. Obviously due to Israel, Iran's proxies, and also even Quds Force and their other apparatuses to project power into Syria had all been significantly degraded. At the same time, all of the kind of other Axis powers that have developed are all very focused on Ukraine. And so it just became very clear that even the slightest bit of pressure could topple the Assad regime. At the same time, Turkey was obviously making certain moves that indicated to me that their allied groups on the ground, their proxy groups, would take action. Another indicator that I saw was that the Turks and Erdogan were starting to act more aggressively and assert more power, even politically, within NATO. And all of that combined with the fact that we're in this sort of, the waning days of the Biden administration, when they would have much, much less ability to act and actually get a different behavior out of the Turks, led me to believe that this was the window where Assad would fall. And I think that really, when you look at it, just kind of looking back now in hindsight, so that was my forethought, but looking back at it in hindsight, we actually see that last week, even up until last Friday, the Biden administration, Amos Hochstein and Brett McGurk, two people that are probably some of the most untrustworthy people out there, were running off to the Gulf to try to make a last-ditch effort to prop up Assad. Additionally, they were also lobbying Congress to try to stop the renewal of the Caesar Sanction Act, which would have prevented countries from giving money to Assad to prop him up. And so, you know, I think what you saw there is really what I was predicting in the future, was that the Biden administration, which kind of had very bad insights into what was going on the ground in Syria, you know, and they didn't really have the ability to understand what was happening. By the time that they found out, they realized that this was going to lead to even more instability on their watch. And so that's why they made this very hurried effort to try to stabilize things. And, you know, kind of, well, anyway, everything just kind of fell from there. And we are where we are now.
Absolutely. Well, with regard to the attempts by the Biden administration to uh, basically revoke the Caesar Act, there were also rumors in Washington about Israel's involvement in this, trying to shore this up, which I subsequently also checked, and that was not true. So it seems like there was a lot of effort put into trying to shore up the Assad regime at the expense of those who are fighting against it. And it didn't make much sense as to why the Biden administration was so eager to do so. So late in the game, before they're about to get out, and knowing full well that the House already is pushing for Caesar Act 2.0, not just the one that was in existence. So thank God that didn't work out. Let's focus now on the
Well, I'll
state of
just,
play. Go ahead.
Jonathan, I just want to comment on one thing there. I think a lot of people, it's the reaction to this Syria thing, both from kind of the right and the left in the United States, has been very interesting to me. People are trying to kind of, people on both sides of the aisle in the U.S. assume that the Biden administration is acting with intentionality and competence. And so they're assuming that somehow, you know, the toppling of Assad was intentional. Some people are saying that. Others are saying, well, the ability to, you know, the last-ditch effort to prop up Assad was intentional. And I think really we're just giving way too much credit. The reality is we have a group of people who, for the past 4 years, have shown that they're anything but intentional, deliberate, and competent. So I think really what truthfully happened was they were caught off guard again. It's probably about the sixth time that they've been caught off guard in a major international crisis, largely due to bad intelligence and bad management of the intelligence community. And then they are kind of, you know, just almost irrationally scurrying around trying to stop a domino from falling, just simply because they're afraid that it will be another bad mark against their legacy. And then they start acting very, very kind of irrationally. So, you know, again, a lot of the people I see are trying to give too much credit. The last thing I'll add on this is that there's this just kind of knee-jerk reaction in the U.S. political dialogue to say, this group is bad, this group is good. You know, that's very easy to do, right? Black or white. That's a very easy way to think about things. The reality is there's a lot of bad out in the world. And I think really if I was giving any suggestion to somebody that was in the US saying, how should I look at this scenario? Well, don't say bad or good, just look at it for what it is and realize that the chessboard has been completely jumbled up and we've got to figure out how to win the game now. And the pieces are in all different places.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you the next question, and I'm going to list a little bit of Abu Muhammad Al-Julani's bio. Who is he actually? So I'll establish the parameters, and then you tell me whether or not the international community should accept him, and what are the risk assessments that should be made in order to consider this question or not. Uh, since he was born in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, moved back to Syria at a very young age, studied there in Damascus in the Mezer neighborhood. From there, at the age of 21, 2003, he traveled to Iraq before the U.S. invaded Iraq. And there he joined Al Qaeda Iraq. He was under the command of al-Zarqawi, a man who has more blood on his hands than any other Al Qaeda figure, at least within the time span of his activities within this terrorist organization. At the same time, in 2006, he was caught. He was captured by the United States, put in prison where he was until 2011. During his time in prison, he met a man called Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, became part of the Islamic State, one of the founding members with this devilish individual. And over the years, once he was free from prison, he left Iraq, went to Syria in 2011, started an organization called Jabhat al-Nusra, which in 2012, when it was established, was actually initially established as part of an affiliate of the Islamic State, Daesh. A year passed when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi asked him or wanted to force him to make this Jabhat al-Nusra part of Al-Qaeda of Daesh in the broader sense. He refused, asked to become once again affiliated with Al-Qaeda in 2013, became the number two under Ayman al-Zawahiri, and for the next 3 to 4 years, he became a very significant part of Al Qaeda, basically, as part of Jabhat al-Nusra, becoming the most potent force fighting the Assad regime in the southern part of Syria and the area of Dar'a and the Golan Heights in particular. And once he was cornered off by the Assad regime, Iranian Shiite militias, and the Russians, he made a deal with the Assad regime that the majority of his people would move to Idlib to live their days in peace after they were fighting so potently. Obviously, Assad made a very bad mistake there, but nonetheless, they agreed, and there he became closer and closer to MIT, or the Turkish intelligence agency. I won't go into the 3 points and details that subsequently evolved out of there, but I'll let you finish the entire picture from your perspective.
Well, look, you've just read off a bio, which above all to me indicates the complexity actually on the ground in Syria. So just to make a macro point first, the alliances and the shifting kind of tribes and who's on what side and the battle lines, these are things that are changing every single day in Syria, and they have been for the past 10 years. So when somebody comes to you and says they understand what's happening on the ground in Syria, I don't even think that the rebel groups know what's happening on the ground in Syria. And certainly us, as from an American perspective, we do not have the level of insight on the ground to know where each of these groups falls on any given day. This is why you see reports of American lethal aid over the years accidentally falling into the hands of Al-Qaeda affiliated groups. It's very hard when you don't understand who you're handing over aid to, or you don't understand what that person's going to do tomorrow, to make sure that you don't make mistakes. So all of that is to say we have to be extremely careful about engaging in situations where we don't have high fidelity intelligence. That's the first thing. On the individual specifically, this is somebody who, if I changed Al-Qaeda to, a political party name in Israel or a political party name in the U.S., I mean, this is a Machiavellian politician who's basically made a series of very, very good moves, changed sides to basically get into power and control the country. And so we're dealing with somebody that's obviously has a lot of confidence in his decision making, somebody that's also going to, I think, be willing to negotiate on some things too. But again, I'm very hesitant to come out and say something like he's a bad guy, because the reality is he's who's in charge today. That's what we have to deal with today. I can't go back in the future. I also probably can't, from the U.S. government perspective, again, from the U.S. government's perspective, it's also going to be hard to effect a change for all the reasons I just said, which is we don't have a good understanding of what's happening on the ground. So we just have to accept that's who's in charge. And we've got to move out from there.
Indeed. Well, I'm across the border, of course, southward from the border with Syria, and I happen to look at it a little bit differently. But I know he is the current figure that seems to be in charge. I'm asking myself for how long, because this
Yeah.
specific individual is responsible for the massacre of Druze, of Alawites, of Shiites, of Christians in Syria, of rival Sunni groups, for that matter. And,
Mhm.
in the Middle East, one thing that is quite apparent to everyone is the Middle East remembers who did what to whom. And therefore, I'm asking myself, to what degree do the people in Sweden, where they have some 50,000 strong militias and very capable with backing from other countries in the region, and not only in the region, we also have groups that are affiliated, of course, to Turkey, namely Jaish al-Watani, or in English they call them today the Syrian National Army. To what degree are they agreeing with the Islamist or jihadist characteristics of this individual? A friend of mine described his overtures to the West and saying all the right things at the right time as portraying himself as a Jeffersonian Democrat, which, of course, is quite the characterization. Nevertheless, this man has many enemies, and this is something that we should take note of.
So, Jonathan, I think that's a good point. The Middle East has a long memory, and certainly within these various tribes and ethnic groups, you see the same thing too. A perfect example of this is we're still having sectarian violence in Iraq 20 years later. But I see a lot of a lot of similarities with what's happening in Syria now between what happened in Libya, in the early days of Libya. There was a celebration in the street. You had this kind of jockeying, very peaceful, initially peaceful jockeying for power. I mean, unlike Gaddafi, Assad made it out in time. He probably learned the lesson from Gaddafi to actually get out of there before he was lynched. And so the key thing though is, yes, we are already actually starting to see sectarian violence and revenge killing against members of Assad's clan. And I think that there is going to be a lot of revenge, and that's why I don't really see a real stable state emerging in Syria. Again, that's all the more reason why, from the American perspective, I think we need to be very, very careful about what we do next, because we have a very bad track record of getting involved in these sorts of things. We have failed to create a stable situation in Libya. It's been, I think, almost a decade, maybe more than a decade. We've failed to create a truly stable situation in Iraq. And so we just need, from an American perspective, we need to be super careful about where we intervene. What I will say on one other point on this, which is that, name me one other stable democracy in the Middle East other than Israel. Does not exist. I think people in the United States need to remember that. So if the expectation is that we're going to have somebody ascend to power in Syria who's all of a sudden going to create this great democratic system, it literally is a fantasy. So you rule with power. Whoever has the most guns, whoever has the most money, the most backing, the most power, that's who's going to be in charge. So we just need to keep that in mind. Again, I'm being very careful intentionally not to say this is the horse we should put our bet on, because I truly do not believe, from the American perspective, that there is an ideal horse in the race.
I can't agree with you more. I do think that the next step for Syria, and correct me if you think otherwise, is Turkey, which is the big winner in this situation, alongside Qatar, will seek to leverage the return of Syrian refugees or migrants in Europe, the United States, Australia, throughout the Middle East, but particularly in the West, for reconstruction. So they cannot reconstruct the economic situation in Turkey is very difficult, to say the least. Inflation is staggering high. The Qataris cannot do it by themselves. They will need Western money to make this happen, and their only leverage over this is naturally the refugees, the Syrians, millions of Syrians that left and are living in Europe, in the United States, Australia, and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm sure there will be a large repatriation. We're actually already starting to see a little bit of that, and I think that given what's happening in the United States, President Trump is absolutely going to be looking to return people that are here on refugee status, given the fact that Assad is no longer in power. And so I think we're going to see repatriation of people to Syria, and I think that there's going to be the same thing from Europe. The question again is going to be, where are we investing money, right? We really don't know where that money is going to go. I'm sure that the Qataris have their own network of Muslim Brotherhood affiliated people that they'll be giving money to. I'm sure they'll do that partially in coordination with Turkey. But beyond that, is that investment for reconstruction, or is that investment for maintaining the power dynamic that I just mentioned a few minutes ago?
Indeed. Well, we don't have very much time left, and there is one actor that we do need to take into account, and that's the Iranians. What's their next step? They just lost a significant leg in their axis of evil.
Yeah, so I think this is really unfortunately the next domino to fall in the final 40 days of the Biden administration. And I am very concerned that it's already teetered over to the point where the team that's currently in charge may not be able to do anything about it. And I will note that obviously Sullivan was visiting Israel today. The Iranians have lost all standoff that they created between them and Israel. The objectives of Hamas, Hezbollah, were all to, one, create distance, and the Assad regime were all to create distance between Israel and Iran and keep Israel off balance and distracted. Now that all of those distractions are gone, Iran realizes that really there's nothing militarily, strategically, operationally standing in between them and Israel. And that is a very, very dangerous proposition for them. They are almost certainly concerned at this point about regime survival. And I think that they will take steps to make sure that the regime can survive. The most obvious potential step is racing to conduct a nuclear test to show that they are capable of producing a weapon. We know that they have enough enriched uranium to do this. Now, it may not be miniaturized, meaning that they might not be able to put it on a warhead by January 20th, but they will, I believe, attempt to do a test if they continue to feel encircled and they feel that that level of encirclement is increasing. And so that's really where what the U.S. does becomes very important. I know Israel obviously has been very clear that they will take action and not allow that to happen. But in doing that, there will be now another point of direct conflict, more than just a shadow war, that will emerge in these last 20 days. And so I think that that's really the dynamic we're dealing with. And I'll just, in closing, why am I saying that, before January 20th? I think it's just obvious, right? I mean, we're already seeing on the world stage people beginning to react to the fact that President Trump is coming to power. They know that he's going to reassert American dominance and strength. I think it's something the Iranians are very, very well aware of. And they know that their time to act freely, that window is rapidly closing.
Mr. Ezra Cohen, former Under Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, currently a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, thank you for taking out of your busy time to be able to brief us on all those topics. I'd like to also thank all of you at home until our next edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.